Good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you may be, and welcome to this prize giving and presentation for the 2020 Winchester Poetry Prize. I'm Stephen Boyce. I'm the chair of Winchester Poetry Festival, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us for this event. It had been our intention, of course, as you'll appreciate, to run the prize giving as we have done in the past in Winchester during the festival weekend with all the buzz and physical excitement of that event. However, for reasons you'll understand, that's not possible this year. And we've in fact rescheduled the 2020 Winchester Poetry Festival for October 2021. And we hope we'll see you there for that event. The distinguished Northern Irish poet and activist John Hewitt, who died in 1987, famously said, "If you write poetry, it's your own fault." At Winchester Poetry Festival, we take a more compassionate view. We felt it was especially important to honour the poets who between them have submitted over 2,500 poems to this year's competition, by holding the readings in a format which is as close as we can make it to the physical event that we would normally run. And as we're all becoming increasingly adjusted to online events, that seemed to be the appropriate vehicle. Now, whether it was because in this year of lockdown, people had more time on their hands, or perhaps they had more to say, or just that we're becoming better known as a competition, or some combination of all those things, we're absolutely delighted by the response that we've had this year. Of course, often the judge is a particular draw because poets, quite properly, want their work to be read by a respected and admired practitioner of their craft. And we couldn't be more thrilled to have snapped up as this year's judge, Andrew Macmillan, who, I must remind you, read every one of those 2,500 entries. In fact, he's been an absolute joy to work with. Madeline Smith, our festival manager, tells me that the poems were returned promptly to her after Andrew's adjudication. Thoroughly dog-eared and covered in coffee stains, it was clear that they had, in the best possible sense, been lived with, mulled over, and fully appreciated. In a moment, Andrew will introduce the commended and winning poems and poets. But before he does that, let me remind you why he's so well qualified for the task of judging our competition. Andrew Macmillan made a huge impression with his debut collection, Physical, which was the first ever poetry collection to win the Guardian First Book Award. The collection went on to win the Fenton Aldborough First Collection Prize, a Somerset Maugham Award, an Eric Gregory Award, and a Northern Writers Award. It was shortlisted for numerous other prizes and in 2019 was voted one of the top 25 poetry books of the past 25 years by the Booksellers Association. And it's been widely translated. As if all that weren't enough, Andrew cemented his reputation as a writer who, among other things, approaches the subject of male desire with honesty, fervour, and a sure command of his craft in his second collection, Playtime, published by Jonathan Cape in 2018. It was a Poetry Book Society recommendation, a Poetry Book of the Month in both the Observer and the Telegraph, and a Poetry Book of the Year in the Sunday Times, and won the inaugural Polari Prize. Andrew is senior lecturer at the Manchester Writing School at Manchester Metropolitan University, and he lives in that city. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome Andrew Macmillan.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for that wonderful introduction. Sitting through things like that is almost always like sitting through, I think, one's own funeral and someone kind of reading a eulogy about all the great things you've done in the past. But judging this prize, as Stephen was saying, was just an intense joy and a great relief for me to do over kind of lockdown, to spend time with, as Stephen said, 2,500, more than that, poems that arrived. In fact, they measured them and there are, I think, 11.5 inches worth of poems kind of stacked up in one box that I spent time with. And what we're going to see this afternoon is the results of that process. Every single one of these poems is brilliant and worthy of our attention and worthy of praise, I think. Judging a prize, I often think it's a strange thing. I've only ever won one single poem prize in my life when I first ever started out. And I remember the judge said, "This is a poem that goes about its business very quietly," which always struck me as a kind of strange euphemism that you might say about someone that was quite boring. Well, that's a person that goes about their business very quietly, instead of saying they're a bit dull. But I think that there's often a myth around poems that there are certain kinds of poems that win prizes, and that one way to perhaps kind of ingratiate oneself towards the judge and to winning the prize might be to write a poem that is somehow what the judge themselves might normally write or might kind of enjoy. And I tell a story in the introduction to the anthology, which I encourage you all to get hold of, that kind of explains that a little bit more. And I won't spoil that story. You'll have to read it in the anthology. But I think that, like most of us, I'm drawn more and more to poems that I couldn't write myself because I'm baffled by how they've done it. I'm impressed by the different ways they've managed to kind of craft the language or use language in a new way in poetry. And so all these poems that we're going to hear this afternoon, I don't think I could have written, and certainly couldn't have written this well. And so that, I think, is really important. I get sent a lot of very explicit gay sex poems oftentimes, and it's always nice to live vicariously through other people's pleasure as I sit alone in my study reading these poems. But there's such a breadth and range of subject as well in these poems, which is something that we're going to find. They're not poems that have coalesced around a single subject or a single idea. They're poems that speak both to this time, but also, I think, back across time as well. And so the way it's going to work is I'm going to begin by introducing the commended poems who've made it through that tranche of 2,500 and more poems. And then we'll see each one of those on screen. They'll read the poem, and then we'll build up to the highly commended, and then we'll get to the third, second, and first place prizes. The poets themselves don't know where they've placed, so there's an extra kind of layer of jeopardy to bring to this Saturday afternoon, which I really like. I'm just sorry that we can't be there in person and to do this together, but I think it's brilliant that Winchester have been able to put on this event and that we can still celebrate all these brilliant poems and brilliant poets. There are two poets from the first set of commended poems who couldn't be with us this afternoon, and so I'm just going to read those poems out for them before we get going. And so the first poet I'm going to read is a poem by Susie Wilson called "Everyone Who Comes to My Funeral Must." And this is the first commended poem of the afternoon. Everyone who comes to my funeral must be a bell, be the air, bell, be the brass, air, be the edge, brass, be the tang, edge, be the tongue, tang, be the sides, tongue, be a ropes, side, be knotted, rope, be a hung, knot, be a swung, bell, be stung once by a bell's song. And so that is the first commended poem of the afternoon by Susie Wilson. The second, and we'll see Jenny is posting for us biographies of each of the poets into the chat box as we go through as well, in case you want to check out more of their work or find out more about them. The second poet who sadly couldn't join us this afternoon is Salima Hill. And I think that Salima Hill's kind of presence on this long list and in the commended poems is testament to the fact that these poems are all judged blind. Salima Hill is a kind of icon, I think, in poetry, and one of my favourite ever poets, certainly. And for her name to turn up on this list was a real joy for me and a really unexpected thrill. And she is one of our commended poets this afternoon as well. And so this is Rabbits by Salima Hill. When he drops me off in the middle of nowhere, my lemon yellow duffel bag as usual, stuffed with goggles, oranges, the towel where rows of identical ducks like identical pilgrims who know there is something bigger, if not what, who walk towards it in enormous boots, happy to be understanding nothing, waddle back and forth without a break. Where he drops me off, I round the hill that's always full of rabbits, rabbits everywhere. They're on the banks, they're in the lane, they're everywhere. They've overrun the garden by the shop. They've colonised the car park and the climbing frame, and soon they'll be inside at the reception desk, demanding that they need the pool for weddings. And so now our first two commended poets of the afternoon, Susie Wilson and Salima Hill. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce another three of our commended poets. I'm going to read all their names out, the three names at once, and then we'll see each of them in turn, and they'll read their poems for us. And so we've got Fatima Zahra, Ben Verinder, and Paul Stevenson. All three of them wrote brilliant poems, and I'm delighted that we get to hear them now.
Hi, this poem is called Ore Chori, and it's titled after one of my favorite songs from the movie Lagan. Loft 38, 2017. It's past 12, and we're at the third club to convince the bouncer I'm 21 at. They've lost their hair ties. I'm holding our bags and watch on in envy. Their 2 a.m. bodies stirred by iced cocktails. Sashayed by the latest Kygo song they only know the chorus to. We're in a corner next to the ladies' bathroom my friends swear someone is making out in. I'm stirring my virgin mojito and slinking back in the dark. My body nailed to the chair except for my feet. They betray me. 2017 was the last good year. Jeddah 2001. I used to know how to let the Bollywood songs take the reign, pulling out the old sequin skirt and gold blouse from the bottom of my cupboard, slipping the cassette tape into the lips of the 3-part sound system. Eyes closed. I'm the swish of the lehengas from the movie Zuma and I watched on ZTV. My little body was enough. Before school, before the senior with the tight ponytail laughs, you might not want to try that again. My body slinks in the oversized white shirts we bought for our farewell dance. Desire is already a stranger I am dancing for. Even at 1 a.m., after waking Amma to come watch me dance in the living room, I've just learned all the steps to Kuchna Kaho and can keep twirling if I forget. Watch me move then, turning on my heels. More sequins flash, twirling in gold.
The impossibility of a sex poem. I no longer want to describe what happened in the service lift at the Park Lane Hotel, the midnight beaches, or how beautiful pull over after the bridges in Finnish. The aches, deliriums, upholsteries, the long walk home through snow and stolen clothes, even if I wanted to. And now you'll consider these events when I'm no longer sure. Nor is there an adequate symbol, not a blind, incomprehensible God to whom I fed the fat of my life. Neither helter-skelter, nor phosphorescence. Perhaps only an afternoon of rain, when schools of kisses burst from her lips, laughter, songs, the bed rocked by a lapping of tongues.
Birkenstocks. Your sandals used to irk me. The way they showcased your 2 big toes and wide, flat feet. Comfortable, I'm sure, but for my taste, too much foot on display. This morning I was on their website, read all about tradition and ethos, how they're crafted, made from a mix of latex and leather, felt and jute. I wondered at the season's bestsellers, Mayari in metallic rose, pearl or yellow, and Cameron, the wacky silver model. Yours were the classic, always Arizona, dark brown, 2 straps, brass buckles. I watched the video in German, Scroll down to learn about cork, how oak trees are worked in strict rotation, the bark lifted every 9 years like peeling a new skin. They gave long close-ups of the hands of the Portuguese workers, men young and old who were fluent with their tools, scraping the bark layer, taking off lengths to be cleaned and boiled, thin strips punched for stoppers. It was on that farm, in the heart of Alentejo, that I saw your father, and it clicked, how you were fashioned by your mother and him. And I could see their 4 feet, able to breathe and insulated from cold, cushioned against hard ground.
Thank you very much to those first 3 commended poets, and you'll have seen already the difficulty that I've had in choosing these poets and from kind of rank these poems. You know, everything that we've heard and everything that we're going to go on to hear is of exceptional quality, and just I think proving how hard my task was in choosing between all these poets. And so we've got another set of 4 commended poets. Again, I'll kind of give the name of those 4 poets, and then we will hear from each of them in turn. And so this next 4, this group of 4 commended poets, we have Serge Neptune, Mary Mulholland, James McDermott, and Genevieve Stevens.
For every queer they kill, a merman is born. And when that happens, little brothers, know that nobody can end us, not even the dawn with its scented knives of glare. Remember the flower-crowned goddess that fought for us first. Her hordes of sharks and troops of whales, purpled waves and harpoonry. How the slander of that metal rusts away under the seabed sand. Forget the tears, unravel the silk of your grief to the current, let it carry further into the tidal swell. Leave the toxic bits of you down a crevasse where nobody can find them. Crustaceans will have their fill. Prescriptions, pills, intravenous drips. Here you were never sick. Here a blue prayer, glacial drone of light, pierces from above with gentle arrows. Remember, desire is a holy thing. Think of the letter Q, a drooling mouth, awkwardly breaking the pace of the alphabet, always in need for another. Claim both water and land. Let the silver of your scales dictate the dance of other stairs.
Still life. I'm holding the ew's head as her dead lambs are removed one after another. She has the eyes of an empress. I stroke the fine hair on her cheeks as she gulps, unblinking, swallows, mouth muscles twitching, and her lips part with one "burr." I recognize the pain in the sound. The lambs are perfect. They are sculpted alabaster. A plein air artist is arranging a palette, lead white, raw umber, purple, and the cadmiums, orange, yellow, red. The newborns are cellophane wrapped. They are inside see-through balloons. Someone will breathe life into them. They are sleeping, and when they wake, they'll be jumping with the other lambs. But the flies are arriving. They land on the allantois, like people crowding an accident, gawping.
They could be having sex. They could be having sex, all these gym boys judging. From the noise they're blowing, panting, groaning, shouting, Harder, faster, just one more push, and then an almost come cry as they finish and wipe dry their heads on their raised shirts before staring at their own reflections in full-length mirrors, then taking off to the showers, washing together like lovers, or shamed schoolboys scrubbing away the game.
Gossipers on the Southwestern. You would think they had nothing to say, the way they hand it to each other. Crepe paper, string, a gift the size of 2 average hands. Pass, pass back. And with each tilt of conversation, it does not grow or gain weight or reveal itself to be the answer, but how they guard it, stashing it under coats and bags when the attendant comes, who clears his throat to say nothing as he stubs their day returns. Only then, when he's far enough away, do they raise it up again, one woman passing so the other can receive the swish of the crepe, the tangled promise of the string.
Fantastic. And again, another 4 kind of magnificent poems, and the kind of range and diversity of what the poems are talking about, the kind of subjects, the way that they're writing into them, I think is just dazzling. And it's great to have the biographies. Again, just a reminder in the chat box, we've got the biographies and a little bit of detail about each poet as we're going through. And so if there are particular poems that speak to you, that kind of grab you, have a look at the bios, check out their pamphlets or their other poems elsewhere, and just really, you know, kind of seek these poets out and let them know that you enjoy their work. And again, to repeat what I said at the start, I couldn't have written any of these poems, and certainly I couldn't have written them this successfully, which I think is important to say. And so we're on to our next block of 4 commended poets again. And so in this next kind of block of 4, we're going to hear another 4 brilliant poems, this time by Tamsin Hopkins, by Nikki Heinen, by Matthew Hay, and by Matthew Griffiths.
Knuckles. A famous chat show host takes off his jacket. This is significant, partly for reasons you probably know. He's making you feel like you're welcome. Relax, be on the sofa with me, be at home with us. What you may not know is about the 3 knuckle bones he keeps in his jacket pocket. As always, he has turned them over between his fingers, pressed them into his palm all the way from the dressing room to the jacket removing ceremony. When he takes off his jacket, he is casting himself into the conversation, spinning the wheel, cutting his support, taking a chance. It comes across as charisma. He believes, or wills himself to believe, the bones belonged to a martyred saint who everybody loved. She conjured life itself with her voice. She could free prisoners, save sinners, and all by talking. Yellow-brown, rubbed smooth, the bony knobbles remind the chat show host of the many caprices a conversation may conceal, that he must stay alert, ever watchful, be relaxed, yet be in control. He reminds himself of contained energy, chaos controlled. I am the I am the storm. He sees himself spinning with power, zapping outwards when necessary. Oh yes, I'm good. Tonight, they have scheduled a dangerous guest for the show, a politician he has fought before. The politician is prepared. We tune in to see sparks fly. We put our lives aside to see this fight. Tonight, on the way from the dressing room, the chat show host can't remember how the saint story ends. Nervous, he moves his favorite knuckle into his trouser pocket where he can reach it, but it jabs his leg. The 2 bones left in his jacket are angry. His tongue a desert, he has only one question left, a locust in his mouth.
Summer at the hospital. You could never imagine it. A California sun bleeding down on the rotting plaster. Weeds. A summer gone bad in the crater of today, yesterday, tomorrow. Every day the same, but for the occasional bath. The 2 trees behind the barbed wire topped wall have birthed leaves. I watch the jigsawed green over smoke. Claire is doing star jumps in Lycra, and at 12, a nurse comes out with a box of nail varnishes. We congregate like nuns around the rainbowed box and pounce for the right color. Cranberry reds, poison purple, swimming pool turquoise, gold with iridescent specks. It's a bomb in a fruit shop. The heat swells my toes, and the rat in the corner snuffles weeds. The sun is so high, it ain't never coming down.
The colour of death is desert peach. Belinda Carlyle in the cold sun. Beach sunset sets fire to plum sorbet hearts. What is it about low tide that draws 1,000 tears from the gut? The moon and orange bloom. The magnet singing to the soul's sodium. Is it Americana's sun-bleached systems? Experience via the brain leafing through its movie archive. A kingdom is drawn around a sun-bleached carpet. Belly down, eyes flicked up to the TV's moon. Certificate 18 meant nout, as Nan would say. So chromatic horror flickered in the tides of my face. Dusk holds hot magic, sodium all through the lounge. Cats turn on carpet like beached whale babies. Your movie paused at 20. You stopped going out. Our life with you, an archive flecked with dust. We lived through the easy earth girls, the plastic pearls, Americana's sun-bleached kingdom in the gut. In the Pantone book of colour, death rubs shoulders with plum sorbet. Death is not glass or glacial. Glass is at least something. The shades fade from mint eyeshadow to banana split sundae. Your shade is the whirring carnival winding down for the night. I hold in my mind the poles of you, the poster with Elvira's plum lipstick, the My Little Pony rubber relic of God. How were you here, then not? How was the pony's arse infused with butterscotch? Leafing through the brain's archive, colour, the first of May. The shade that blooms in the mind's tide is desert peach. How it swarmed you in summer, sodium sorbet turning cats to sand bodies. Your house of glass, a liquid oozing with the flow of light. 1,000 sun-bleached carpet weaves, 1,000 golden worms, tiger stripes in the haze. This is what the gut sings, a kingdom of dust, a bracelet of kids riding their bikes into sky. Taped to the cover of a magazine, an edible worm in a lolly, bronze curl suspended in a heart of glass. I worked my tongue around it, licking and only eroding edges of nothing. How the nothing shrank, dissolved, bringing the worm into focus. How the years after a death shrink, bringing only the dead into prominence.
Nice hat, meaning I noticed that you are wearing a hat. Meaning, I noticed that you are wearing a hat because not many people wear hats these days. Meaning, I noticed that you are wearing a hat because not many people wear hats these days, and thus you make yourself remarkable. Meaning, I noticed that you are wearing a hat because not many people wear hats these days, and thus you make yourself remarkable in the sense of being worthy of remark. Meaning, I noticed that you are wearing a hat because not many people wear hats these days, and thus you make yourself remarkable in the sense of being worthy of remark, even if my tone suggests otherwise. Meaning, I noticed that you are wearing a hat because not many people wear hats these days, and thus you make yourself remarkable in the sense of being worthy of remark, even if my tone suggests otherwise, and a great deal of my eyes are throwing their manicures at you. Meaning, I noticed that you are wearing a hat because not many people wear hats these days, and thus you make yourself remarkable in the sense of being worthy of remark, even if my tone suggests otherwise, and a great deal of my eyes are throwing their manicures at you to signal the distance between us. I keep that distance, thanking myself I have become only my hat.
Thank you very much again to all those 4 poets that just read for us in that section. And again, just the kind of range and voices of these poems. Voice was something really interesting. I think that as a poet, I'm always trying to not write another Andrew Macmillan poem. And one of the things that was so interesting about all these poems, I think, and all these ones that we've just heard, was kind of the different voices, the different kind of registers of address that each of them have, and the kind of often surreal kind of detours and things like that they take, I think is quite remarkable. So we've got another 4 poets who were highly commended that we're going to hear from now. And so these 4 poets are Simon French, Ken Evans, Alexandra Corin Takibana, and Barry Coyden.
Pedigree. My ancestors have mouths like rusty padlocks. Curiosity buries me in Mercury and Gazette, hoping for a fluke of reportage. I hunt for certificates handed out, for exits, entrances, coupling. A tree grows. Appears my provenance is rich with turnip pickers, farmhands dung-lugging for pittance. Never slung into workhouse, no transportation for us. Modesty prevails regarding wartime bravery. Seems we've been sportless, artless as Rothgo. I descend from alehouse plotters whose tankard revolutions sank in the morning slops. From peddlers of weevil bread, pegs, photocopiers. I'm not from slum boy made good DNA or flouncing champagnery, as rumour had it. There's no trace of puff pastry faces or peculiar men spoiling themselves in the spittle and pox of the highway. No blackguard seduction from gin palace or chloroform. Ours is a porridge opera that's built my bone. For the want of a pile, my inheritance is robbed. The foxhounds aren't coming home.
In the static of a cafe. I try and it fits, the same size as mine, her battery. I loop the aid over my ear, a song far away, no usual frequency I tune to. Behind me, to the left, the clash of china cup on saucer, the yell of a boy, a man's laughter, a dog rearranging their legs under a table. A finger squeaks on a laminate menu. The batteries from her house-cleared floor left there for emergencies. Silver on her carpet, tiny pennies of sound for between my ears. At the end of what's dimly locatable, a pink voice. Hear, oh hear, oh hear me.
Before reading the poem, I'd like to give you a couple of footnotes about a Japanese word and expression. Jime jime is Japanese for the feeling of sweat on your skin, the feeling of humidity. Gokiburi is the word for cockroach. Kotoshi mo yoroshiku. Thank you for your support for this year in advance. Ichigatsu. New Year family party, and mother-in-law's watching me eat slippery, fatty tuna with chopsticks. Our feet are beside a kotatsu stove, and I'm having to shift positions, alternating between cross-legged, kneeling, and stretching out onto tatami. Nigatsu. Shinobu takes me on his bike to Bow Beach. We stop to pet a Pomeranian belonging to a wannabe American on his Harley. They pose in matching bomber jackets, the dog in sunglasses. Sangatsu is Hina Matsuri month, Girls' Day. Mother-in-law puts tiered ornamental dolls on display. Shigatsu is for cherry blossom viewing. I drink Anglo-Japanese society beer, kanpai with strangers, listen to praise for our Viking noses. Gogatsu is shirasu season, baby white sardines piled high on rice, black dot for an eye. Rokugatsu, jime sweat on my skin. A stranger runs after me, gives me her umbrella in the June rain. Shichigatsu, wet heat. My rotating fan hums. I spot a gokiburi above my futon. Get up, hoover it off the ceiling. Song of cicada persists. Hachigatsu. Stepping out at Heathrow, I see Brits through non-British eyes. How overweight they are, how greasy their fish and chips. Kugatsu marks the start of school. Students chant "Onegai shimasu," bow at beginning and end of class. And then there's earthquake drill. Jugatsu is the Shimizu Kokusai Open Day. Yutaka Sensei's on guitar. I sing Hey Jude. Juichigatsu provides respite. A trip to Nikko to see the changing of the leaves and hot spring monkeys. Junigatsu. Finally, it's Bonenkai. Goodbye to the year party. Fishy egg custard. Are you strong for alcohol? Can you eat umeboshi, sour plum? And Uno Sensei's speech in English. Struggling to differentiate between L and R sounds, he asks all the teachers to do a big crap.
Angie's party. I cup your cold hands. Young looking as when we met in '76, gone is your high colour I commented on that evening at Angie's party. It was the cheap red wine, you said.
And of course, if we were gathered together in person, we'd have cheap red wine, cheap white wine, and we'd kind of be able to mingle. So do feel free to kind of pour yourself a glass of cheap red or cheap white wine. We've reached a kind of bridge in the programme now this afternoon because those poets, every poet that we've just heard is one of the commended poets. And so we're going to move on in a second, first of all to the Hampshire Prize, then to the highly commended poets, and then to the third, second and first prize to give out. And so, you know, shake it off a bit, stretch yourself out if you need to. And we'll get moving on to the second section. I just want to, first of all, thank and congratulate again all those commended poets who we've just heard from. And so Fatima Zara, Susie Wilson, Salima Hill, Ben Verinder, Paul Stevenson, Serge Neptune, Mary Mulholland, James McDermott, Genevieve Stevens, Tamsin Hopkins, Nikki Heinen, Matthew Hay, Matthew Griffiths, Simon French, Ken Evans, Alexandra Corin Tachibana, and Barry Coyden. Every single one of those poems is fantastic. Every single one of them is different and unique and is doing something, I think, very important in poetry. And again, I just implore you, as I've been doing, as we've been going through this, have a look at those biographies on the side, because I've been looking at where I can find out more about these poets and read more of their work, because that's what I'm kind of really excited to do as we move forward. And so next, we've got the Hampshire Prize. And as well as the overall prizes that we're talking about today, the Winchester Poetry Prize is very kind of special in that it has a Hampshire Prize. And Hampshire is perhaps the second best county after Yorkshire, of course, to live in. And of course, therefore, it needs its own poetry prize. And so this prize is given to a poem that was the highest ranked poem by someone who lives or works in the county of Hampshire. I think I'm explaining that right. Someone will jump on afterwards and say a little bit about how they sponsor the prize and what the prize means. But my job essentially was to just simply kind of gather together all the poems that I loved, and we're seeing the kind of fruits of that this afternoon. And then to look for a little H that was marked in the corner of some of the poems to say, this poet lives in Hampshire. And rather than judge them for that fact that they didn't live in Yorkshire or Manchester, I was then able to celebrate one poem as winning that Hampshire Prize. And the winner of this year's Hampshire Prize, and also a commended poet, you know, in the prize in general, so it's a little 2-for-1, I guess, this one, is Imogen Cook for a poem called Nose Piercing, which I just think is a really beautiful, just entirely together poem. And so Imogen Cook is going to read that poem for us now, and then we're going to hear a little bit, I think, from the sponsor of the Hampshire Prize about that.
Sometimes, in one salon or another, I'm afraid I still hate her. I'm never letting my hair grow past shoulder length. I'm cracking the retainer back over the underbite because I'm starting to hear her voice again. Surprised that I recognize it because she never did speak like I do now. Even lapdogs learn to growl when scared. It's not really about the hair.
Congratulations to Imogen for that lovely poem. We would be hearing, as Andrew suggested, from our sponsors, Warren and Son, were they not running a very successful commercial stationery business at the moment. I want to say warm thanks to Warren's. They have sponsored this prize for the last 2 or 3 years, and they started out as a printer and publisher and been trading in Winchester since 1835. So they've seen a few poets come and go, and I think they know a good thing when it comes across their way. So we're very grateful to them. They are kindly presenting a Lamy fountain pen to Imogen, worth a substantial amount of money, I have to say, or they would do if we were all together in Winchester. Imogen, we'll make sure that prize gets safely to you, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much to Stephen, and congratulations to Imogen again on winning the Hampshire Prize. I love that they're not here because they're running a very successful kind of wholesale stationery business. And I think in the future, when I can't get to an event, that's also what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, I wish I could be there, but I'm afraid I'm running my stationery business. And so thank you to Warren and Son for being able to, for allowing us to give out that Hampshire Prize, and to Imogen Cook, congratulations for winning that. And so we shift on into the highly commended poems. And again, you know, we've seen across the body of this evening so far that we're really kind of splitting hairs, I think, in terms of how we have to rank these poems, in terms of trying to find kind of differences between them, that some are commended, some are highly commended. But at the end of the day, that's the kind of burden that falls onto the judge. And so these next poems that we're going to hear, and the next poets that we hear from, are all going to be highly commended poets. And I will give you the name of each one of them, and then we'll, and the name of the poem, I think, probably. And then maybe I'll say a bit about it, and I'll see how I feel. And then we'll hear that poet read their poem. And so our first highly commended poet is Claudine Tutungi, and for the fantastic poem Lazarus, which, as we'll hear, I just think is incredibly dynamic and just the flow of it, I think, is pitch perfect. And so please welcome Claudine to read her poem, Lazarus.
Thanks, Andrew. Lazarus. The little fly you squashed and put into the ashtray. How it walked out later the same day. Across the carpet, bold as you like, cold shouldering your attempt at homicide, cold shouldering your botched attempt at homicide with the aloofness of a hired gun. To the extent you broke into guffaws, then fell stricken to your knees and sobbed, forgiving every one of your murderous intentions, forgiving yourself, letting the patch of sun claim its prize.
Thank you very much for that wonderful reading of the poem Lazarus, which is our first highly commended poem this afternoon. And the next highly commended poem this afternoon is by Simon Middleton, and it's called Men at the Antenatal Class. And this is a poem that just, I think, has such a wry observational eye and takes us into perhaps a point of view which we might not ordinarily get.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Men at the Antenatal Class. We sit in a horseshoe of blue chairs, all in different stages of pregnancy. The floor is littered with laminated cards bearing images of parents and babies, ranging from watercolor to hyperreal photographs. We are asked to pick an image we feel connected to. We whisper, avoid eye contact. I retrieve a sketch of a couple with a baby in their arms, say it makes me feel togetherness, a bond, unity, as if these are given things. At the front, a table is lined with TENS machines, plastic models of the uterus, and woolen breasts knitted by the local WI. The midwife begins by telling us how powerful touch can be during the first stages of labour. She says we should massage our wives or partners in clockwise motion, always following the body's natural camber. We are not told that touch may, in fact, be the last thing our wives or partners want. They do not say that some of us will sit there inept, scared shitless, or fetch pitchers of iced water, or sit at the side of a birthing pool, holding the nozzle of gas and air between each contraction. To demonstrate breastfeeding, the midwife knots a balloon around her fingers, the rubber squealing as it tightens to a pig's tail. Pointing to the knot, she tells us to imagine this is the nipple, her other hand like a jaw, an unsheathed sock puppet, and this is baby's mouth. The session closes with relaxation. We find ourselves strewn on the floor of a widening room, staring from the grain in the ceiling tiles to the beige walls. I meet the face of a man across the carpet, staring through me, the skin beneath his stubble pink like a small child's, knees tucking slowly to his chest, willing himself smaller as if the sheer weight might compress him to 2 dimensions.
Thank you very much. I'm back. I muted myself. That's the first time I've done that this afternoon. If people were playing along on Zoom bingo, you can get host accidentally muted himself when he spoke and have a shot of something, of that warm red wine. So thank you very much to Simon for reading that brilliant poem, Men at the Antenatal Class. And our third highly commended poem this afternoon is by Ollie Isaac, and it's Tender as in Easier to Chew, which is just a brilliant title for this poem that just kind of feels so visceral in its use of language and just kind of got its hooks inside me. I couldn't let it go. So please welcome Ollie.
Tender as in easier to chew. After school, this indoor pool splits open. A fresh wound on earth. It lures young boys like flies, whose voices crack, not like ribs, but eggs. one by one against waves, as we leap in with shut eyes. Chlorine washes away my sweat, stings like holy water. I'm dragged towards the deep end that aches for braver bodies. Here is where I learn to trust. If I stretch beyond my eyes, I will be assured, because you have to plunge yourself whole if you wanted to start again. So I sink to the bottom of the pool, where the water gets the sound from my speech. Sour desires I bury next to worn band-aids. Pray they turn tender, as in easier to chew, until it can soak back into my skin. Changing rooms were another school class I could not pass.
And thank you so much to Ollie. And the way that they're able, in that final line, it just kind of haunts me, that the changing rooms, another class I wasn't able to pass. I think that we can all relate to that line that they've been able to craft there at the end. So thank you very much to, and certainly I can. So thank you very much to Ollie and for that reading of their highly commended poem, Tender, as in easier to chew. So on to our next highly commended poem, and this one is by Elena Quattro, and it's called Fishbones by Candlelight. And this is such a haunting, kind of mysterious poem, I think, that uses, you won't be able to see this as it's read out, but uses white space in a really interesting way, but also just is an incredibly powerful narrative that it gives us as well. So please welcome Elena.
Thank you, Andrew. Fishbones by Candlelight. For the third time that month, they cut the lights in our street as my mother laid a platter of fish on the table. We took out the candles bought in churches that weren't meant to exist anymore. Under the shivering light, the cold, blue silver fish skins were seascapes. Each bite of bland meat was spiked with dozens of fine bones, the salt not enough to make it worth it. The white flesh falling apart into flakes as if it never belonged to a living thing. The backbones were stitches on my plate, holding nothing together. And I had figured it was just a game, a bone at the right angle, in the lining of my throat, and I'd be out. But it was hard to leave back then. Someone was always watching or listening as we coughed for breath. The dead eyes we set aside with our forks stared back at us while we took the bones one by one and restored skeletons on our plates, making it look as though we were mourners by porcelain graves.
Fantastic. And thank you so much to Elena again for this, that beautiful kind of haunting poem. And there's the cadence, I think, of those lines is truly beautiful. And so we've come on to our final highly commended poem now. And I must say as well, if you can hear snoring, it's not me, it's my pug that's kind of asleep on my knee as we're doing this. And so I myself am alert and excited, as I always am. The pug, not so much. She's asleep on my knee, but that's okay. And so our final highly commended poem this afternoon is by Virginia Astley. And it's called The Horses Are Wrapped in Their Blankets Steaming. And it's just the quality of image in this poem. I always, as a poet, try and avoid image because I'm not very good at it. I tend to like kind of plainness. And so I was just blown away by the control and the kind of exuberance and unusualness, I think, of the imagery in this poem. And you'll see what I mean as Virginia reads it to us now. Take it away, Virginia.
Thank you. The horses are wrapped in their blankets, steaming. I thought I'd never see you again, and yet this morning early, when something brings you to mind, I speak your name. Some hours later, drawn by a Wedgwood sky, leaving the village behind, I take the path by autumn hedgerows, slouching with their freighted berries, past purple-leaved hazel, orange field maple, until coming to old chicken sheds and an idle rusted tractor, I pause to lean on the 5-bar gate as the sun streams across. That's when, up the slope, uncovering a load of logs, like old times, I see you. There was almost a frost last night, you say, ignoring the strangeness of all this, while far above us a lone crow circles, checking his territory like a landlord.
Here's the thing, they've muted me again. I'm beginning to get paranoid, but I've unmuted myself because I have that power. So that's fine. And I love in Virginia's poem, that moment of circling like a landlord at the end is just such a great image. And so those are, for this afternoon, our highly commended poets. And so we heard first of all from Imogen Cook, the winner of the Hampshire Prize, and then we heard from Claudine Tutungi for Lazarus. We heard Simon Middleton for Men at the Antenatal Class. We heard from Ollie Isaac and their poem Tender, as in easier to chew. We heard from Elena Quattro for Fishbones by Candlelight. And we heard from Virginia Astley with the horses wrapped in their blankets, steaming. And so what a wonderful and again, very different, highly commended list that is. And so again, shake off, kind of stretch out. We're into the home stretch, refill that wine or that water or whatever it is that is your tipple on a Saturday afternoon. And we're going to go into our top 3 prizes. And so again, and I'll say a little bit, I think, about each poem, a little bit more about each poem as I introduce it. And I think it's been true all the way through, as I keep saying, that I couldn't have written any of these poems. And I could try, but I would fail because they're doing things in poetry that I can't do, which is what excites me. And that remains true for these final 3 poems and 3 poets that we're going to hear from. When I was in college, there was a boy that I really fancied. And I really, really wanted to impress him. And he was really cool and he was a bit of a rocker and he really liked kind of music and things like that. And he would always come to college kind of wearing band t-shirts of bands that no one had ever heard of and things like that. And he was just kind of so dreamy and I was so obsessed with him and had this massive crush on him. And so I thought, right, I'll go to college wearing skinny jeans and a band t-shirt and then he'll fall in love with me and we'll spend the rest of our lives together. And so the only kind of band t-shirt that I could find in our house was a very, very kind of oversized one for the Arctic Monkeys. And I thought, this will do it. And so I put it on and I went into college the next day and he just looked at me and shook his head and went, oh, Andrew, really? The Arctic Monkeys? And just walked away. And that was the end of our very, very, very brief love affair that existed only in my head. And I tell that story just because I think that oftentimes, as I said, we can get sent things as judges in competitions that people think will speak to us, almost like they're putting on that t-shirt to impress us. They think they'll like this, so I'll send that to that competition. And I think all the poems that we've heard, both in the commended and the highly commended categories and we're about to hear, are poems that aren't poems I could have written. They're not kind of Andrew Macmillan poems. They're very different poems. They could only have been written by these poets. And I think that is an incredibly important thing. And so, having recounted to you my youthful experiences, we'll now move in to the top 3 poets. And in 3rd place in this year's Winchester Poetry Festival Poetry Prize is Luke Palmer, and for the poem Desire, Youth. So it's got a little thing in the middle, so it goes Desire, Youth. And this is a poem, again, perhaps we won't kind of be able to hear this necessarily in the reading of it, but it's doing something really interesting, I think, with form, with line breaks within the kind of scansion of the line as it moves across. But it's also just got this incredible kind of flow to it as it moves through. And it's one of the poems that rose almost immediately to the top for me and then stayed there throughout as I was reading all the different books. And so please welcome the 3rd prize for this year's 2020 poetry competition, Luke Palmer, for the poem Desire, Youth.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. Just checking I'm on. It's just so wonderful to hear that and to kind of feel very seen right now, I suppose, I guess I'm saying. So this is Desire, Youth. Carefully, so carefully, because you have already stepped, will at some point step from a warm interior into a blustery courtyard. At the precise moment, a gust of wind whipped. In the instant, the wind will whip your hair around your tender head. And the person who walked, the person who will walk with you through that door, whose long hair also flew, whose hair will also, in that gust of wind, mingle with your own, some of it almost entering you, completing you in that present. And because you saw, you will come to see that something for a second just beyond your grasp came like a kitten to your fingers, comes almost close enough before it was called away. It will be called away in the very gust that will bring it to you, in the same gust that brought it. And because you knew all this that October morning, one October morning, you will witness from an upstairs window as two people step into a gust of wind, maybe years later, all those years gone by, its passing was borne more easily. This will be the hardest thing to bear. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Luke. And again, congratulations on the third prize in this year's Winchester Poetry Competition. And for those that were wondering, I did check beforehand. There was meant to be a spider plant in that bird cage, not a bird that's hanging above his head. So don't worry, there's not a missing bird. It was a spider plant, but it didn't do too well in the cold, but it might be replaced. And so that was the third prize. And we're now on to the second prize of this year's competition. And the second prize this year has gone to Claire Collison for the poem Little Deaths. And this is just quite a remarkable poem. This is a poem that I'm really excited for you to hear. This is a poem that is visceral and unflinching and all those slightly cliche things that we have to say about poems like this. But this is a poem that does what I always want poems to do. It looks at the body and it doesn't look away. And so I never got it. Do you know in films when a couple perhaps are about to have sex and then it cuts to a curtain flapping in the wind, then it cuts to them having a cigarette in bed afterwards. And you say, well, we've missed the most interesting part. And this is a poem that isn't about a couple coming together in that sense, but it's a poem that interrogates one's own body. It's a poem that interrogates one's own body and it never looks away. And there's a bravery in that, I think, that I really wanted to reward. And so this is the second prize in this year's competition, and it goes to Claire Collison, and it goes to the poem Little Deaths. Thank you very much, Claire.
Little Deaths. I could talk all day about what makes me damp. Sex and tamoxifen. Men who wetted my cunt despite myself. It's my specialist subject. Disobedience juices, wayward cells, mind under matter. Cancer had decorum on the ropes before you could say, fuck. Before you could say, I'm not ready yet, ever. Soaking bed sheets, leaking liquids I'd no names for. Slicing off my breast, stabbing syringes into my own belly, undappled me. The first thing Audre Lorde did after her mastectomy was masturbate. Cancer is nothing if not mitigating side effects. There was no menopause. Blood was stopped, precipitating an unscheduled homecoming to the halcyon years when our fluids spilled.
Thank you so much to Claire for that really powerful reading of that really powerful poem, and congratulations to Claire on being the second prize winner in this year's poetry competition. It's what a moving and visceral poem that really is. And so we're almost there. We're almost at the winning post. And in order to build the tension, what I'm going to do is just remind us all of the commended, then the highly commended, the third, second prize winners, and we can all kind of politely applaud in the comfort of our own homes, or we can do that poetry that people often do after a good poem. We can just go in the comfort of our own home. And then after I've done that, I'll reveal who the first prize winner is and the poem, and just say a bit about that before we hear the poet read that poem. And so, first of all, in the commended poets, we heard from Susie Wilson, we heard a poem by Salima Hill, we heard from Fatima Zara, Ben Verinder, Paul Stevenson, Serge Neptune, Mary Mulholland, James McDermott, Genevieve Stevens, Tamsin Hopkins, Nikki Heinen, Matthew Hay, Matthew Griffith, Simon French, Ken Evans, Alexandra Cohen, Takibana, and Barry Coyden. And they were all our commended poets, and I want to give them a fantastic round of applause for brilliant readings as well of their work. And then we moved in to the highly commended section, and we had Imogen Cook, Claudine Tutungi, Simon Middleton, Ollie Isaac, Elena Quattro, and Virginia Astley for their highly commended poems, and again, just read incredibly beautifully. And then we've had the third prize, which was Luke Palmer for Desire Youth. And then we've had Claire Collison for the second prize for the poem Little Deaths. And I did, and so we're going to hear from the first prize winner in a little bit, but I am getting a private message that says, don't forget, we need to get Hugh and Stephen and Hugh on before the winner. Fantastic. So, Stephen and Hugh, do you want to come on now before I reveal the winner?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, that's great. I just want to say, this is an opportunity really to say thank you. A very warm thanks to our sponsors for this prize, Paris Smith. They are highly valued by us. We, as a voluntary organization, a charitable organization, rely very heavily on a mix of funding from both public and private sources. And to have the support of a highly respected law firm, very prominent in our region, is terrific. But not only are they a formidable legal partnership, Paris Smith also have a wonderful reputation and a long history of support for the arts. They really get it, and that's extremely important to us and to all arts organizations that they support. I'd just like to invite Hugh Miles, a partner at Paris Smith, to say a few words. Hugh.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Ladies and gentlemen, I won't keep you in suspense for long. I know that you're not here to listen to me, and you very much want to hear from the first prize, but please just indulge me for a few moments whilst I explain Paris Smith's ongoing support for this event. Well, there's never been a more important time to support the arts. Music and theatre have been in crisis all year. Venues which are central to communities are under threat across the country, including close to home in Winchester and Southampton. To do our bit, Paris Ship of Theatre Royal in Winchester and the Mayflower in Southampton, regardless that they currently stand empty. Likewise, this event would ordinarily have taken place in a packed hall at Winchester Discovery Centre, full of excitement as the poets read in turn. As Stephen said earlier, the full festival returns in October next year. And if you haven't experienced that yet, I would strongly urge you to do so. It is a wonderful experience. As for today, we're very lucky that technology allows us to share the work of some wonderful poets. Your work helps us express ourselves, to communicate, to process and understand our experiences. It lets us escape. Thank you to the poets. I'd just like to end by thanking Stephen and his team for the opportunity to be sponsors again this year. I'm very much looking forward to what comes next. I'm very sorry I can't hand over the prize personally, but I promise you it is real and not virtual.
Thank you, Hugh. And it's great to hear, I think, that the prize is real and not virtual. That's a really important thing to say. And so we've come to that time now. I think I've built the tension enough. We've built the, what's the word? I don't know what even the word is anymore. I've got no language left. But we've built whatever it is that we were building up enough. And we can reveal the first prize winner. And I once went to a really interesting reading with Paul Muldoon, where he was giving out some sort of prize. And he said the reason that he insisted on reading every single poem, as I did for this prize, so I read all kind of more than 2,500 poems, I sat and interrogated every single one, is because I think that when prizes sometimes have sifters, they will sift through what they think of as prize-winning poems. And some other poems can kind of maybe go by the wayside. And I think that's very true. I think sometimes we have a kind of cliche in our heads of what a prize-winning poem might be. And I think that all the poems that we've heard this afternoon so far have really spoken back against that in their kind of experimentation, in their strangeness, in their shortness or their length, kind of whatever they're doing. They've all spoken back against that cliche that sometimes there is a kind of formula to writing a prize-winning poem. And I say that just because I think that the poem that we're about to hear as the first prize winner kind of speaks back to that, back against that as well. And so the first prize winner is a really interesting short poem. So it's quite a short poem. And one of the things oftentimes when you're wrestling with deciding who should win a poem like a competition like this is you think we're giving quite a substantial amount of money to a poem, but that doesn't necessarily, I don't think, equal length. And one of the really interesting things about this poem, I think, is that it does what it's able to do in a relatively kind of short space of time, but it does it through surrealism, through this kind of wonderful grasp, easy grasp on fairly surreal images, and is able then to say, I think, some quite profound things about the way we view our bodies, about masculinity, about manhood, but it's able to do it in a way which isn't direct. It's able to do it through this kind of very tight surrealism, which I think is just deployed kind of expertly through this poem. And so the first prize winner this year for the Winchester Poetry Competition is Lewis Buxton, and for the poem Field Dressing a Rabbit. So please welcome Lewis.
Hello. Thank you. This poem's called Field Dressing a Rabbit. The defensive linesman does another 10 reps. He's put on 20 pounds since last season, now a rabbit trussed up in uniform before being cut from sternum to perineum. The dark smell of his offal floats across the field and his body steams as his back thumps against grass and he does another 20 crunches. The coach pulls out his guts, turning his belly to muscle, skinning him in the heat, unseaming the tendon from bone, cutting at his hindquarters, the dark pink back straps, the best parts, ignoring how tender he could be. Do I get to say something more, Andrew? Because I feel like I just want to say thank you to many, many people.
Like, you can have an Oscar moment if you want.
I just want to say thank you to you. I want to say thank you to all of the poets who have been on this long list. Like, I think they're all admirable and wonderful. And I want to say thank you to the organisers. They're really, really like proficient and kind and simple. And the final thing I want to say is that I would like, if possible, next year, I will talk to the Winchester Prize about this, but I'd like to pay for, out of my prize money, to pay for 10 writers on low incomes to enter a poem to the competition as well, because I think that these things should be cyclical and always give back into themselves. And so that's what I've got to say, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lewis, and that's an incredibly generous speech and a really brilliant reading of that poem. Thank you very much again to all the poets. I hope and I hope that you have enjoyed this afternoon, and I hope that you feel that you found a kind of new family of poets. I think one of the really exciting things about judging a prize as well is that moment when it comes to the what I think of as the unmasking, almost like you're doing a vaccine trial and you have to unmask and see the results. And so you choose the poems, you rank them, and then you see, you don't know the names of anybody, and then you unmask them and you get to see the names. And there's some names that you know, a lot that I don't know, but I'm thrilled that I now know each of you, and that I can go away and look up much more of your work. And so thank you very much to you all for that. And I must say as well that you've all read your poems incredibly well, under kind of odd circumstances of being online, under odd circumstances of doing it through Zoom, that everyone's readings have been brilliant. When I won that competition all those years ago that I mentioned at the start, it was a strange competition where the poems were read by actors. And so my poem was read by one of the men who'd been the horse in War Horse, which brought a certain something to it. But you've all kind of exceeded that, and you've read incredibly well. And it's been a joy to be a part of this evening, this afternoon, in fact. It's not evening quite yet. I'm just saying that because I want a wine. And so thank you very much again to everyone. I'm just going to hand back over to Stephen, who's just going to say a little bit about the anthology that contains every single one of the poems that we've heard this afternoon, and also to talk through the dates for next year's festival, when hopefully we can all be there in person together. So thank you very much once again. Congratulations to all, and I'll hand you back to Stephen.
Andrew, thank you so much. Warmest congratulations to Lewis and to everyone of the commended and winning poets. I just think the quality of the writing that we've heard this afternoon has been fantastic. It makes us very proud, I think, as a festival and as a promoter to be able to support poets in this way when there's so much quality and diversity out there. We really, really appreciate your contributing to this prize. Everyone who takes part in a festival like this, or I should say in a competition like this, is not only putting their poetry out there for the world to have a look at and for the judge to give some recognition to, but very, very importantly, whenever you support a poetry competition, you're supporting the ecology of poetry, because you're contributing to the well-being of a magazine, a publisher, a festival, whatever it may be. So, you know, you're doing a lot of good for the general ecology of poetry, and we really appreciate that just by taking part. Andrew, you've been a wonderful host. Thank you very, very much indeed for all your hard work, for hosting this with such verve and giving us insights and asides that I think we all appreciate very warmly. As Andrew has mentioned, there is an anthology of all the poems you've heard this afternoon. Each of the commended poets will get a copy, but you can buy one online at our website. I should also say that we will be running the Winchester Poetry Festival, obviously next year in 2021. We'll be launching it in March or April on the same sort of timescale, and we will be holding an event very much like this, possibly, hopefully, in person in Winchester next October. And it will be part of the festival, which is taking place on the weekend of 8th to 10th of October 2021. So put that in your diary, please. I'd also like to thank once again our sponsors, Warren & Son and Paris Smith, for their generous support. We can't do this kind of thing without the collaboration and support that you give us, and we're extremely grateful to that. I should also thank Madeline Smith, our festival manager, who worked extremely hard to make sure that those 2,500 poems got to Andrew in good order. And to Naomi and Lex from Tandem Collective, who've been extremely busy flicking the switches and twiddling the dials behind the scenes for us this afternoon. You've made it work beautifully. Thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to seeing you all next year at the Full Festival. And we hope that you'll enter the Winchester Poetry Prize again. Please keep an eye on our website, social media, sign up for our newsletter, become a friend. you can support us, and we'll continue to promote poetry throughout Hampshire and further afield. So thank you very much indeed for your support today, and goodbye.